we're live, so you've got about 10 to 20 seconds.
Let's give it 20 to be on the safe. 15, there's a compromise. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sustainable Development Panel for December. So first of all, Jackie, do we have any apologies, please?
Yeah, we've had apologies from Councillor Davis. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Not be notified of any? No. Okay, thank you very much. Shall we have a look at the minutes of the last meeting, please, then? That was on the 1st of October. So everybody had an advanced copy and a chance to look at these, hopefully. So are these a correct record of the meeting, please? Yeah, lots of nodding heads. Fine, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to item 4, the Greater Norwich Local Plan update. Now, I think you'll be aware that there was a report, but also there have been recent developments, and the agenda has only just gone online, I think, yesterday afternoon. So we're expecting, so first of all, apologies that you were landed with such heavy reading at such short notice, and we recognise that most people won't have had an opportunity to read it properly and take it all in. So Graham and Judith, between them, I'm sure will give us a detailed explanation of where we are at. But we're all in the same boat because it was fairly last minute, and that's to do not with us. That's to do with negotiations taking place between the various authorities involved that delayed things. So who's going to lead us through? Is it Judith or Graham?
I'll start, and then I'll hand over to Judith to take you through it. Okay, I was just going to reiterate some of what you've just reflected on, Mike. We're aware that the papers only came out yesterday for the GNDP meeting that's been in the diary now for a while, for the 7th of December. I think the point that you might just want to note from the GNDP papers now they've come out is that within it there is a further date for a further GNDP meeting in the 16th of December to allow further consideration at the, if you like, the partnership level before the local plan moves into the formal decision-making stages, which rests with the individual councils, as I'm sure I don't need to remind you. So in our case, the approval of the Regulation 19 version for publication will be a decision that comes through and needs to be made by our cabinet at its January meeting, which I believe is on the 20th of January this time. So we're still a little way off cabinet making that formal decision about its endorsement, though in practice it's a very difficult thing to do because there's 3 partners involved. If it's a difficult thing to make substantial change to an emerging plan following its agreement through the Greater Norwich Development Partnership. Certainly anything that affects wider things is pretty difficult to do. So that's the process that we're involved in. Following today's meetings, where Judith will take you through in a little bit of detail because of the short notice publication of the papers, explaining more of a workshop session so you can ask questions and be told it. We don't really expect any sort of formal decisions to make. The purpose of scheduling the meeting today was originally, hopefully, you'd have had a few days to read and digest the thing and be able to have a debate in advance of the GNDP meeting on Monday, when of course both Mike and Kevin are appointed members on the GNDP. So we'll be at that debate on Monday morning, on Monday afternoon. And the purpose of scheduling this meeting now was to allow, that argument to be finessed and debated prior to them attending that meeting, so to maximise the degree of influence. What we'd suggest following today's meeting, if there are further further things that come out over the next few days that you think ought to be raised at that meeting, or issues that you've got of concern, then if you email them in over the weekend, we'll effectively try and produce a sort of summarised briefing note of what they are for Mike, Kevin, and indeed Alan for their attendance at Monday afternoon, so they can view those comments and pursue that within the meeting as they see fit. There was another point I was going to make about that process, but it slipped my mind. The other general points I was going to make around this is just to stress. Clearly, the process is quite a long-standing process now. The GNDP itself was formed back in 2007, so it's now approaching 14 years old. It's actually had considerable success, and there are very significant strategic advantages for the city in being able to pursue local plans on a joint basis in the way that it has done. You know, without a joint local plan, there is no way we would have got the city deal. City deal has resulted in around about £200 million of infrastructure investment to support the growth agenda being directed through to Norwich over the past few years since its inception, and including sort of £21 million of direct investment in infrastructure through the pooled infrastructure levy, which is, you know, the City Council has benefited from that direct investment in infrastructure to a far greater proportion than the infrastructure levy that has been raised from within the city. It also, having a joint plan and being able to plan sensibly across the wider sort of urban area around Norwich, massively assists with strategic relations with external funding bodies. It provided a real basis on which to hang the town investment plan that we submitted and have been offered £25 million of grant funding recently, and having an adopted local plan in place is about the first question that Homes England always ask when you have any conversation with funding about them. They want to know where things are. So if you're trying to give confidence about investable propositions, both to the industry and get money out of government, there is massive advantages of having that planned approach in place. So as Mike has alluded to, the process of producing the current Greater Norwich local plan has not been smooth by any stretch of the imagination. There are clearly, as you would expect on issues like this, somewhat different views about the scale of growth and the direction of travel across the different members of the partnership, and we're planning on a shifting sands at the moment. Over the summer, we took a couple of papers through panel updating on where those discussions had got, and clearly we've had a detailed debate about the planning white paper that came out, but the planning white paper which included another version of the standard methodology for housing need posed a major challenge to the Greater Norwich local plan that gave a number of options around how we proceeded with the local plan. Just to remind you, effectively 3 options were looked at, and back the GNDP agreed back in I think it was late September, early October, that the sensible option to pursue was one of actually trying to accelerate the plan progress on the Greater Norwich local plan, dispense with any further formal consultation under Reg 18, and proceed with a Regulation 19 consultation, which is the one where you formally, you are consulting only on soundness issues. So that's the approach they've decided to take. The reason for that is frankly because if we didn't take that approach, it would be either overtaken by a very different methodology for calculating housing needs, which would be very difficult for us to cope with, or indeed it would be it'd effectively get overtaken by the new planning system. So there's transitional arrangements were announced under the white paper, and it is very much the intention to try and use those transitional arrangements. So the last time we looked at the plan itself was back in January. Judith will take you through those. Were set out, some of the concerns we had with the emerging plan were set out and repeated in the covering paper that we prepared for this meeting. I'm pleased, I won't steal Judith's thunder, but I'm pleased to report there's been this iteration of the plan. Whilst it hasn't been the subject of further consultation since January, it does respond in some way to the concerns that cities raised, in particular the number of housing allocations that are made has been increased, so there is some level of movement towards the position that the City Council has taken. And I will now hand over to Judith to lead you through some of the detail of what that change is and what the initial view on the document itself is. Cheers. You're on mute, Judith, still.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, I was. What I thought I'd do, because I think Graham has basically covered the material in the covering report, is just to take you through the paper that is attached to the papers that are published on the GNDP website. The report that covers the changes to the local plan document. So I'll do that essentially and sort of give you time to sort of explain the different changes that have been made and give you time to ask questions and so on, because it's obviously quite difficult to take all these changes on board at this such short notice. If you can just bear with me for 1 second, I wanted to refer back to the in the covering report that is with the papers for this meeting, our covering report, paragraph 4 references the cabinet meeting in January, I think it was, on 15th of January, and the sort of key issues that we identified following that, that we felt that the some aspects of the plan should be improved prior to submission, and and Graham has alluded to these, but the inadequate scale of growth proposed and growth ambition, the fact that a great proportion of development is proposed in village locations, the rationale for a separate village clusters plan being weak, the policy for strategic infrastructure insufficiently ambitious in supporting the transition to a low carbon future, and then just generally the lack of ambition on transport and the focus on the development in rural villages not being compatible with statements in the plan about addressing climate change. So that's just as a reminder of the issues that we flagged up earlier on in the year. So if I've got a copy of the actual document on my screen, but what I was going to do was focus on the covering report that has been written for the GNDP meeting, and that sets out a table of changes. The changes are between the Regulation 18C draft, so the draft that you saw earlier on in the year and which was published for consultation, and then the version that they are proposing to take to the meeting on Monday. And it does note in this report that this document is still not fully updated, and there will be an updated document tabled at the meeting on Monday, so it's worth bearing that in mind. And just to give you a bit of an overview, Joy, who's here as well, and myself, oh yeah, Joy's on the screen now as well, have both been involved over recent months in commenting on different versions and updates to the plan document, many versions of it, and feeding through changes. Most recently, we have fed through some changes very recently, but given that the number of changes that are being taken on board, not all of our changes have yet been taken on board, but we know that they will be. But we'll talk you through those sorts of issues when we get to the relevant parts of the this table and the document as well. And another thing to say, just as general background, is that a lot of the evidence, or some of the key evidence, isn't completely finished and hasn't yet been able to inform the policy, particularly evidence on viability. It should be finished any time now, I understand, and also evidence on the employment and retail issues. There was an employment retail and town centre study carried out in 2017, and obviously an awful lot has changed since then, and that study is being refreshed, and I believe it should again be published very any day now. But so that there are some gaps still in the documents relating to some of the evidence studies as well, so it's just worth bearing that in mind. And the intention is that these evidence studies will be completed and reported, and the updates made to the version that goes to Cabinet. But for some of the evidence, it's possible that some of it won't be fully finished until after that point, after the consultation actually, and it'll be submitted to the Secretary of State along with the final version of the plan. So it's not ideal. It's a sort of a function of the fact that we're trying to take this plan forward really quickly under the transitional arrangements. And that's one of the issues and the risks with this. But so I think the best thing to do is if we can turn to the table in the report. Do you want me to try and share this, or is anybody else able to share this, or has everybody got a copy that they're able to look at? Sorry, Mike, I can't hear you. I'm afraid.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, I'm happy to be guided by the meeting as to what you would find most helpful. Would you like Judith to share her screen of the particular part she's talking about?
I think that would be useful for any members of the public who might be watching,
Yeah.
but also it would also be helpful to have a page number.
Yes, certainly, that's fine. I can.
So, are you able to share your screen now,
I'm
Judith?
going to have a go at doing that now. I hope I can. So bear with me a second. Right, share screen. Just bear with it. It should be doing. If it doesn't, somebody else.
Here we are.
Right,
Ooh,
let
yeah.
me just make this bigger.
There we are.
Good, excellent. Right,
Can you
so
zoom in a bit, Judith.
sorry.
Can you
Can I
zoom in
zoom?
a bit? Yeah, just zoom in a little bit because it's a bit small on my screen.
Is
That's,
that
that's okay. Yeah, everyone
is
happy
that
with
all
that?
right? Okay.
The only thing I would say, everybody, is that while we're screen sharing, I can't see everybody. So if you put your hand up, I may not see you. So probably the best thing is, if Judith, if you, at the end of each bit, if you want to ask if there are questions, is that the
Fine.
best?
Okay. So as it says in this covering report, that the key change between the
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I can't read that on my screen, but I've got another bigger one. Can you tell me what page it is?
yes, I think it's page 12. That's what it's telling me of the papers of the committee papers that are on the website. So hopefully that's what you've got, page 12.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the key change between the Regulation 18C draft that you saw earlier in the year and this draft is that the overall housing numbers have increased to by just over 5,000 homes, and that's because the strategy continues to address housing need on the basis of quite this technical stuff about 2014 based household projections, and that's required by the government's methodology. But the recent 2018 based projections for Norwich indicate that household growth may be higher. So this increase in the housing numbers is to respond to that, and also to respond to the direction of travel in the planning white paper for higher housing numbers for the area indicated by government. And you know, we had a recent discussion at SD panel about the new standard methodology for assessing housing need and how that was going to hugely increase the housing figures, so that at least this increase of 5,000, while it's not the 20,000 or whatever that was indicated through the standard method, this at least is response to that direction of travel. So that increase in numbers means that there's a significant buffer above the housing need figure, 22%, rather than about 10% in the previous version of the plan. So this table that we're looking at, it shows how the housing figure is derived, really, and so it's you start off with your housing need figure, and then you take account of delivery that's been made, so minus that, and the housing commitment figures, and it results in a new allocation figure of over 10,500. also new policy, or policy 7.5, which relates to villages. It provides for the delivery of small numbers of homes on small scale sites adjacent to settlement boundaries. So there's an extra 800 there. And then there is some allowance for windfall development in there as well. And that brings the total housing figure to over almost 49,500. That is it was previously about 44,500. So as I said, that allows for a 22% buffer. So those are the housing figures that are included in the plan, and they are quite markedly increased from last time. And this does respond to our concern about the scale of housing growth that was being proposed and the sort of level of ambition in the plan when we discussed that earlier on in the year. We feel that helps to respond to that issue. And then we've got table 2, which is on page 13 of the document. So hopefully you can see that. And this is a sort of table, a high level table of the changes between the previous version and the current proposed version. And it's so there will be a very detailed response to the public consultation published. As you can remember, when we've done it before for our own local plans, very detailed, line by line, responding to what the different comments have been made by various people making representations. But this is just a high level summary of the changes. I think the more substantive changes are further on in the table, actually, but I'll just take you through these. And if you've got any questions, do ask. Are there any questions on the first bit about the housing so far? Sorry, I should have asked earlier. If we can always pick anything up at the end as well. So with the introduction, it's really just clarifying the changes since early 2020 when the last version was made, and it's clarifying that the plan is being produced under transitional arrangements and the role of the strategy. So it's really taking on board the referencing the Planning for the Future white paper and setting the strategic context. And as it says in the table, updated references to the proposed ban on the sale of new diesel and petrol cars. So that's something that a government announcement. So just a general update. And obviously there's quite a lot of time has passed since the earlier version. So there are quite a lot of updates within this, as well as responding to comments. So I'll just move to the second box here on page 13, the profile. That is really just the spatial profile provides sort of key information, demographic information and other stuff about the Greater Norwich area. So there's just an update of that, and also clarification on the role of the spatial portrait. It's not a policy, it's just setting out the current situation and key issues. So again, more clarifications and updates to figures, data, etc. With the vision and objectives, there have been some changes just to increase the emphasis on things like the environment as set out in this table. Sorry, I'll just move it so you can hopefully see most of that. Enhancing the environment, local character and high quality design, etc. as set out in this table. And that's in response to comments from various consultees, including Natural England, Historic England and the Environment Agency. And it also refers to the publication of the draft local industrial strategy as well. So it's mostly just updates really and slight changes of emphasis. The delivery and climate change statements, excuse me, I don't think there haven't been very many updates to these statements. They're not policies, they're statements in the plan. As the team have noted in the sort of right-hand column, there's been general support for these through the consultation process. And a reference here in the second column, continued use of nationally produced data, district-wide data for carbon emissions will be retained. Some consultees have suggested having local monitoring and targets. The explanation is set out in the next box, which is that it's not possible or desirable to set up plan-specific monitoring for climate change. Contributing to lower emissions to help meet targets nationally reflects the role that local plans can play. Okay, so just if any comments at this stage on any of that before we move on to the strategy itself? Oh, Leslie, I think.
I absolutely want to comment and record my objection to saying that there'll be no local monitoring or climate targets. You know, we have a binding Climate Change Act, and the fact that that doesn't put targets, that doesn't put local details into its targets is not an excuse to do nothing. It's a reason to use the best available information we have, which on the Tyndall scatter system is to decrease carbon emissions by 13% a year.
Mhm. Noted. We can note that.
Every other
Yes.
policy needs to be, you know, should be impact assessed to make sure that it does that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can note that comment, and that's something to be brought up with the members at the meeting. Thank you. Moving on to the strategy section then, on which is page 14 then onwards in the table. Excuse me while I just remind myself. So the strategy then refers back to the housing numbers. We've already looked at that table, so that's sort of repeating some of what we've talked about before. So we've now got, as I said earlier, 5,000 new homes. The way that is made up is set out on page 15 in the table. So there's a decision taken in the previous version of the document, there were 2,000 homes proposed in East Norwich, subject to further updates to that through the master planning work that's going to be done for East Norwich. So the master plan work, where we've got to with that is we've gone out to tender for the consultants to carry out a master plan, which should start next February, March time. And by about the summer, we should, or probably July, August time, we should have the first stage report from that. So that should hopefully be able to substantiate the extra 2,000 dwellings that's being proposed in East Norwich. So, you know, it's not ideal, but we think the site's definitely, they're about 50 hectares in size, got a lot of capacity for new housing and employment development and other forms of development. And it's hoped that it's anticipated really that the master planning work will help to substantiate and support this policy for submission to the Secretary of State. There's other sites that also contribute to that extra 5,000 sites in Coney, Cringlefield, as set out in this table. Also this delivery that I referred to earlier in the villages, in the small sites in villages, an extra 800 there, and also an allowance from Windfall Development, and that comes to the extra 5,000. And as I say, that results in a buffer of about 22% above the existing housing need figure. Then moving on, so that's policy 1, that's the substantial changes in relation to policy 1. Anybody got any queries? Leslie, hi.
It seems like we're relying quite a lot on numbers for the deal ground, which I don't object to in principle, but we've also said elsewhere, talked about flood resilience, and I wonder how we can make sure that if the deal ground is developed, you know, that it will be very, very flood resilient and future proof, because otherwise it's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key consideration in the the tender documentation, that there's a whole host of constraints on the East Norwich sites, including flood risk, obviously, but there are others as well. And they're going to be the important sort of first stage of the work. Will be examining those constraints and you know, working out how they can be addressed through the scale of development that's going to be proposed there. So yes, it's definitely something that's going to be taken on board. But obviously, the flood risk varies a bit across the sites. You know, the Carrow Work site doesn't have the same issues. So there'll be, you know, it just depends, I suppose, on the distribution of uses across the sites as well, the impacts that flood risk will have. But yes, it's certainly something that's going to be taken into consideration. So moving on then, if that's okay, to policy 2. This is Sustainable Communities Policy. So Sorry, I should have just mentioned it in relation to policy 1. Sorry, just to go back a little bit, but we have a contingency site that's being proposed. It's not included in the figures, but it's a site in Cossey, and I think I think it's 800 units in Cossey. It's a good site for development, a good location, but it's not included in, because the numbers aren't felt to be required at this stage. But there is a proposed policy to enable that to come forward if housing delivery doesn't happen at the rate that is anticipated over a certain period of time. So just to let you know that that's a contingency site. It's not in the city; it's just outside the city boundary, obviously. All right, sorry. Moving on to table 2, policy 2. Then that is on page 15. The changes that are set out here relate to things like clarifications again, about densities that are referred to in the policy, expansion of the landscape clause to refer to local character. That's in relation to Historic England's view that the previous focus on the landscape was too narrow. We've had quite a lot of comments, I think, from Historic England actually. And inclusion of a requirement for public art. There's an addition of a viability clause to the energy efficiency element of the policy. And that's the, if we need to look at that, that's clause 10 of the policy on the document. I don't want to bring up that document as well just at the moment, but that's on page 62 of the actual plan document. And that was in response to viability considerations that as it says in this table, if the future home standard is implemented as consulted on, there'll be no need to retain local energy efficiency requirement, as higher standards than those currently proposed will be required nationally. There's also some clarifications and additions to the policy to refer to the new National Design Guide. To be in line with the Planning for the Future document. There's another clarification to replace the Building for Life 12 document with the Building for a Healthy Life approach. And then we've got, sorry, just move to the right place, excuse me. The requirement for master plan and community engagement on sites of more than 200 units is to be placed by encouragement, and that is to respond to consultation comments and to more closely reflect the NPPF. And there are amendments to the water management and flood risk policy, which is set out on page 61 of the actual plan document, to reflect some of the consultation comments and to better reflect the NPPF policy. So I think those are the comments. That is policy 2. Does anybody have any comments or queries about policy 2? Okay, I'll just move on to policy 3, which covers both the built and historic environment and the natural environment. We have proposed some further changes to this policy, which aren't yet included in the final document, the document that you've got in front of you. They will be included in the final document, and they are more clarifications, reference to design guides and codes, and some minor comments. So, we know that those changes will be made, and they should be made and put in forward of front of the meeting on Monday, coming on the 7th. But so the changes that are proposed, the changes here that are in the table refer to reference for developers to make use of existing guidance on historic areas, policy requirement to undertake heritage impact assessments where required, and clearer language on harm to and retention of historic assets. In relation to the natural environment, this section has been revised, but there's more clarity provided on policy requirements for natural environment assessments, and the policy also refers to the 10% biodiversity net gain requirement now, and then there's an updated reference in relation to the policy relating to the mitigation of impacts on protected sites. And we've talked about this previously, I think, in relation to there's a piece of work that's been ongoing for some time that is identifying a tariff for to apply to all new development, and that will be used to offset, to mitigate the impacts of new development on these protected sites, and it's likely to be just over £200 per home. So that just really reflects progress on that study and the fact that we have to meet legal requirements. With policy 4 on strategic infrastructure, and that's on page 18 of the papers. Sorry. So there's updates on sort of factual updates on transport issues, minor updates, inclusion of changing attitudes to travel as an aim of the Transport for Norwich strategy. So that's just to update it as to reflect the Transport for Norwich strategy. Deletion of the reference in the policy to the Cross Valley link. It's no longer there's no longer a scheme for this proposal, so that's just factual update really, or a clarification. And various other limited changes to the text and policy regarding water infrastructure in relation to comments wrangling on water. It says here possible updates to Appendix 1, setting out infrastructure requirements. I think that is because the work hasn't yet been complete on that study. That I think that's being done by Norfolk County Council. So that will be provided to Cabinet. It will inform the reports to Cabinet in January. Policy 5. Oh, sorry. Has anybody got any queries on Policy 4? I'm sorry, I can't see anybody. I don't know if anybody...
Judith, Denise has put her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I can't see Denise on my screen at the moment. Sorry, Denise.
Yes.
Do you have a question?
Yes, that's right. It was proposed to, well, in this particular plan, the route of the Norwich Western Link is shown on the proposals map. Whereas it was being discussed to remove the Norwich Western Link because it wasn't very far advanced. I wanted to ask about the Natural England's concern raised over the lack of any habitats assessment for in this particular plan over the Norwich Western Link, and also its concern about the barbastal bats, which Natural England says the number there really amount to a threshold for a special area of conservation. And,
sorry.
And then the final thing, actually, there may not be any money because the Highways magazine has just published an article saying that the government's probably going to move money from local major schemes to the national network schemes, and so there's going to be an issue there about whether it's affordable. Well, in terms of money available.
Thanks. I mean, I can bring these points to the attention of, note them for the team to be aware of. Can I just clarify? I think I might have missed a little bit. You mentioned about Natural England's comments. It was about the bats, but prior to that, I think I missed that comment.
They were saying that the habitats assessment hasn't been carried out for the plan in relation to the Norwich Western Link, and that the county relied on a third party to do the work, but that isn't adequate.
Graham, I don't know if you have any update on that.
I'm not going to try and deal with the technical issue, but
No.
the way that the plan is written at the moment is that the Western Link is referred to in the plan, and the reason why it is referred to in the plan is because clearly the county council have announced a preferred route for it, and have and the DFT have approved a strategic outline business case for it, and they are continuing to work on a planning application for it that they expect to submit in 2021. As a major piece of infrastructure, it would be clearly a deficiency of the plan if it doesn't refer to that process going on. But the plan itself does not seek to allocate the land for the Western Link. So effectively, the plan contains text that indicates the position of the district councils, which is broadly supportive of the Western Link, subject to it being part of an integral strategy. That's reflected in policy 4 within the plan, but there is not a proposed allocation of land associated with the plan, because one of the reasons for that is that within that planning context we haven't had the ability to do all the consultation and technical work to support that at this stage in the process. So that would delay the plan being moved forward if we were to do that consultation to consider whether to allocate the Western Link. So that's informed the version of the plan that comes forward without the allocation in, but with factual reference to what I've just said about the position of the highway authorities, who, as you know, are actively promoting the Western Link as a scheme.
Yeah. Can I just ask Graham then? Ask Graham why the link is shown on the proposals map, please. When I was quickly looking through the plan, I saw the proposals map and the link shown. That's why I was so concerned.
Okay. I assume, I'm just trying to think of which document are you particularly looking at?
I must have looked at the document, just sent round last night, really.
Okay, sorry, it's 162 pages long. Can you give us a clue?
Exactly. I mean, I just flicked through, but obviously that jumped out at me.
I can't immediately see where it is in that. I assume if it is shown on the key diagram for the plan, it'll be just a reflection of what the county council have announced, and it isn't an allocation that is proposed in the plan. So one of the issues here, you're only seeing half the plan at the moment, because all the sites and the detailed allocations are not yet in the public domain. But I can offer you some comfort that when you see that, there will be no specific allocation and of the land for the Western Link, because of some of the issues that you allude to and the need for further consultation if that was to be done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, no one's trying to slip anything through, but obviously if you've got concerns, we will clarify them, just to be absolutely sure.
Yeah.
I saw Adam and then Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for my ignorance. In the last paragraph in the column on the left under policy 3, what does NSPF stand for?
National Strategic Planning Framework, I believe.
Sorry, where is it?
Three out of 4 Norfolk.
Oh,
rather than national.
Thank you.
I wasn't actually looking at. I wasn't actually looking at it.
Yes.
I didn't have the context. Leslie wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry if I've misunderstood, but does anyone else see any contradiction between building a road without going through the land allocation procedures, and yet if you want to build a wind turbine, you have to have a neighbourhood plan? That doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to anybody else?
Can I just
Go on,
respond via there's been widespread criticism from the government about the planning system being sclerotic. I think when we've gone through the whole process of responding to the planning white paper, which clearly the council raised many criticisms about the white paper of it in its response, you will note that we didn't adopt the response that actually the system is fine, please don't change it because it delivers sensible outcomes through a sensible process. There are a number of inconsistencies within the planning process that have come arise through various things. All I would say that in relation to the Western Link, it's a responsibility of the local highways authority, which is the county council, to progress. There are different routes for it to progress, and the route of it not being allocated within the local plan is not uncommon, and indeed the same situation applied, and the joint core strategy didn't contain a land allocation for the northern distributor roads those years ago. So it is quite possible for major road schemes to be progressed without having allocations in land use plans preceding them, and it is not at all uncommon.
Thanks, Graham. And yeah, I think it's in terms of our response, in terms of the planning white paper, as you say, the current planning system isn't perfect, but the proposals being put forward by the government are not are not going to resolve that. They're a response to a different perceived problem. But let's not go there. Judith.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to policy 5 then, homes. Yeah, we made a few changes to this policy. We proposed a few changes that haven't yet been made, so I'll take you through those in a second. But in terms of what's in the table, there are some minor changes to clarify that standard affordable housing obligations apply to purpose-built student accommodation, which is excellent, and that the need for specialist retirement units, as well as other forms of specialised housing, are supported on sites with good access to services, etc. So as well, the text clarifies that development management officers will ensure that the need for specialist housing for the elderly and others with specialised needs is considered on all housing schemes. And there are some sites with an element of specialist housing in the site allocations as well. The comments that we've made, I'll just move back up here, that haven't yet been taken on board, but are related to affordable housing. The policy talks about 33% requirement for affordable housing in Greater Norwich, with 28% on sites in the city centre. Many of the sites in Norwich have got marginal viability and may not even, may not potentially support that level of provision. We're a bit concerned because we haven't seen the outcomes of the viability study yet, so that the policy needs to be informed by the viability work. So that's one of the comments that we've made. And there's also nothing within the policy, the way it's written at the moment, to allow for assessment of viability at decision-making stage. So there's no way of assessing whether sites are viable or unviable at that stage. Obviously, the government is placing a lot of emphasis now on plan making assessment of viability. So and that's I suppose why the policy is taking this approach. But we are concerned because of the history we have in Norwich with sites not of marginal viability. So those are the comments that we've made so that haven't yet been taken into consideration. So that's something I think Mike and Kevin are both aware of in relation to the meeting coming up. Any comments at all on policy 5? I'm afraid I can only see a few people. I can't see everybody, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Denise has put her hand up.
Oh, sorry, right. Okay.
It's a question
Denise, you're muted.
Sorry about this. It says mute on my screen. So Yes, I wanted to ask a question earlier, Judith, about housing, but I'll ask it here because it does relate to, it could potentially relate to student housing. And that is changes on the high street and in office work practices could lead to a large release of land and buildings, potentially for conversion to housing. Potentially for student housing, say Debenhams in the city centre. So I wanted to ask really about the windfall allocation, whether in fact that should be increased to reflect that particular trend, and also then to look at a decrease in fixed allocations elsewhere, please.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that the way the windfall figures have been worked out is looking at past rates of windfall, you know, what has actually been achieved. So this is what you're talking about is potential changes that could happen, and I accept that might happen, but I think that the sort of methodology for coming up with the windfall figure looks back. And sorry, what was the other part of your question? It was the second part, sorry.
Well, I suppose, yes, given that the windfalls are likely to increase because of the changing trends of office and high street, therefore you can look at reductions in site allocations, please.
Yes, I see what your point is. I mean, I think that we can raise those issues, but I think at the moment, you know, it's possible we're going to have to keep a close eye on this, really, aren't we, going forward?
I think the point that we need to address is the fact that, you know, there's clearly, through the impact of COVID, which has accelerated certain historic trends quite quickly in relation to retailing, and also brings into sharp relief the sort of office market a bit. It's early days. We don't know how the market is going to respond following, into next year here, and which trends are effectively going to accelerate further, are going to be reversed, whether we reach tipping points like that. In order to rely on information to go into this table here or whatever, you're going to really need to be able to demonstrate delivery. Now, clearly, the City Council, through one of the things that it's received an offer of funding for through the Towns Fund is a revolving fund, which clearly we've yet to fully scope out, but offers a potential for us to intervene in the market in a way to ensure that certain developments that otherwise would stall could be brought forward. That may be able to be used to accelerate development, appropriate development of some of the areas that you're talking about. But the trouble that we've got by bringing forward the local plan to this particular timetable is that we're not in a position to be able to demonstrate what the deliverability of those things are. And indeed, if you cite Debenhams as an example, clearly, you know, went into administration only a matter of days ago. We simply don't know what the implications of that is, and there's nothing that provides us. You would ordinarily not say that's going to be windfall development. You would want to allocate it for a form of development, particularly because the form of that particular block doesn't matter whether it's student development or other residential development. It's a very deep block, and its suitability for conversion to residential development I'd probably question, simply because unless there's some real innovative way of getting natural light into that, because it really would be accommodation for troglodytes to a certain extent in there. So it's a problem. And the issue that we've got here is you're describing a possible trend that we may need to address, but something at this stage that we can't demonstrate any delivery of. So we don't really have the evidence to draft a plan setting out, describing an approach that you're sort of describing there.
Can I just come back there, please, Mike?
Yeah, that's.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, I suppose what we're seeing really on monumental changes in society, and of all kinds, not least climate change and the implications of all these changes. And we're preparing a plan which rolls us forward to 2038, but we don't seem to be really giving a lead on these changes. We seem to be looking back and picking our way very tentatively forward, thinking that, well, there could be, we're going to have to see how trends roll out. Whereas I feel we should be giving much more of a steer for the future. And it's been quite evident for some time that the high street is going to be changing. COVID has speeded it up, but all the signs have been there for several years now. And I feel that we're going to be going forward with a plan which is sort of fixed in the past, as opposed to dealing with the future.
But look, I hear what you say. This whole plan that we are producing at the moment has an end date of 2038, but by virtue of the government white paper coming out, there is no expectation that that will still form part of the planning system beyond a period of about 5 years. So its real purpose is to, you know, give a steer, give confidence to the market to bring forward certain developments in that next 5-year period. And it might take much longer than that to build out, but that's the likelihood that we've got, and we're working under the confines of both a joint partnership approach with, you know, needing effectively within this strategic plan to reach agreement across 3 councils, and also working within the confines of the planning system as it is currently expressed, which very much requires you to be able to produce compelling evidence to demonstrate your delivery that you are resting on, and you know, that we're operating within those confines, which means that some of those, if you like, much bolder and more articulate, more I'm going to put it, more ambitious visions of the future that you might want to describe, just simply aren't really credibly possible to bring forward at this particular moment.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Absolutely right. And it also, there's a balance between how we can shape the future as you know, a county and 3 district councils, and the massive monumental changes which are actually outside our control. So, and we don't understand yet what the impact is going to be. We can see trends, but we really don't know. So, you know, we do have to feel our way through it, because we can't shape those trends. They are what they are. We've seen with COVID how that has really made huge changes, and to an extent we have to understand what those are going to be going forward, and then amend our plans as we go forward. And there may well be a direction of travel which we like. We might like the idea of more home working. We might like for example, and you know, reduce travel time, for example, and we can try and work with that. But there is a limit to what we can actually do, and we do need evidence, and we've got to work within the structures we have to work within, as Graham has said, and also the partnership we're in. So I've got a lot of sympathy with what you're saying, Denise, but you know, realistically, this is what we have to do. Judith.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'll move on to policy 6 then. Some of what we've just been talking about is reflected in some of the changes in policy 6, actually reflecting the current economic uncertainty with COVID and so on. There's a few policy changes on the economy, clarifying that opportunities for sustainable access to employment sites should be maximised. There's a reference again to the NSPF Norfolk Strategic Planning Framework, to the terminology, change the terminology to identify key strategic employment sites. And there's a number of minor clarifications on the airport site. the airport site is proposed to be allocated in the plan. And these reflect just general updates and consultation responses. And there's a reference here to in the third column to the addendum being produced to the 2017 Economy Town Centre study, which I referred to earlier, and that should be completed. Well, it should be completed by now. I haven't heard that yet, but that should be able to enable this policy to be updated. So moving forward. So sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not leaving something out. I think there's been quite a few changes made to this policy overall, but updates to the retail text and policy to reflect the current growth in locally based retailing and promote active travel to local facilities. And it says here, please note that the development management policy already set parameters for development at Longwater and the showground. And there are some updates on providing a local centre being considered for the showground site allocation policy, which I haven't yet seen. I think it's something that we'll be seeing in the next few days. So there's been quite a few changes. Many of them are sort of clarifications and updates to this this policy. Some of it was worded, it wasn't the most clearly worded policy, so we've made some change. We proposed some changes to it to try and clarify some of the wording, and they haven't yet been made again with some of our other changes, but those changes will be made. So if has anybody got any queries on policy 6 at the moment? And I'm afraid I can't see anybody at the moment. But
I can't see anybody.
Okay.
So, Judith.
Thank you. And moving on to policy 7, I just really want to focus on policy 7.1, which is the Norwich urban area and the fringe parishes, and it includes the city centre and East Norwich. So we've made some suggested changes to this policy that haven't yet been made, particularly on the East Norwich strategic regeneration area. Overall, the changes that have been made to this policy are, as set out in the table, that the housing numbers have been updated, reflecting the fact that the overall housing numbers have been updated. It says delete reference to the high proportion of retail floor space in the area currently being in the city centre. So just in response to consultation comments. There are also quite a lot of text and policy changes relating to the importance of conserving and enhancing the historic environment, and that's come largely from Historic England. Retention of a leisure area and late night activity zone. Development at Norwich Research Park and Easton. Employment areas addressing transport and infrastructure impacts. There's some minor sort of updates to correct errors particularly in relation to map 9. So there are references to sites that in this table, there are references to sites that have been added into the site allocation. So the Thorpe Mail Centre at the Norwich Mail Centre at Thorpe Road and the car park site at Lower Clarence Road, for example. And several sites have been deleted, including the Havers Road site. So in terms of the comments that we've made in relation to East Norwich, which don't appear on this table, we've suggested some updated wording to the East Norwich part of policy 7.1 provides the sort of refers to the master plan that's going to be produced, and the fact that that will provide the overall framework that the site-specific policies for East Norwich will have to address, and those are the Dale Grant utility sites and Carrow Works. So we've made some proposed changes to add clarity and to provide greater consistency with the site-specific policies. So has anybody got any queries in relation to policy 7.1? No.
Hello.
Oh, sorry, Leslie.
Marion.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I can't see
I'm sorry.
Marion, yeah.
I'm having difficulty reading it. So just something occurred to me, and it might be in the wrong order. Are we paying? Obviously, we've thought about this, I think, but I was born at the end of the war in the baby boomers. Are we looking forward 20 years to when we may have an explosion in population? Is that
What you
anything
mean
like
as a result of COVID?
COVID? Yeah.
I don't know what you mean, Marion.
No, not at all. But there may be a lot more people around, and I think it's something that should be included.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
I don't know how we can really answer that question other than speculate what you've been getting up to during lockdown, Marion. But I don't think we better go there really. Look, you know, in terms of the overall level of development here, clearly we're working within the confines of government methodology that's been given to us. Clearly, you know, one of the concerns of the City Council is that government methodology has not fully recognised the growth needs of the city. Certainly, in terms of how that number calculates out, the city's own levels of growth need would be below what we previously have calculated through our own strategic housing market assessment. And clearly, what we know of our already pressing housing need, particularly for the delivery of affordable rented products in the city, you know, the numbers coming out from the government methodology are low. It's one of the reasons why the City Council has pressed for an increase in the number of housing allocations since the Reg 18C version of the plan, which you will note have been included within this document. And now we're seeing a greater level of urban redevelopment, and through the Townsdale proposal, we're trying to further accelerate that, unlock some of our stalled sites, and we're doing what we can to see, you know, underused and derelict sites within you know, accessible locations within the city brought forward for development. The framework doesn't in any way inhibit us carrying on with those efforts. Indeed, it actually lends a degree of policy support to us doing things such as that to encourage the recycling of urban land and residential development on it.
Thanks, Marion. No other questions? We'll go back to, Leslie.
Thank you. I'm just picking up on the references to the historic. There are lots of references to preserving the historic and built environment, and that's a good thing. But I think in the same sentence we ought to add "and the natural environment," because its omission suggests that it's being downplayed, and I don't think that's the intention. But I think it needs to be spelt out.
Is this the right place to do that, Judith?
Well, I'm just thinking policy, I think it's policy 3 does refer to both of those aspects. You know, are you saying that there are quite a lot of, in this table, there's quite a lot of references to that? I think there possibly that's because of Historic England making a lot of representations, but I think essentially policy 3 covers both those elements. Is there anywhere in particular you were thinking of that you thought it needed?
Well, we're talking about 7.1, and in the second paragraph on the left, it says conserving and enhancing the historic environment, design and city centre. And, you know, nature that's urban nature is important too. And I think we should flag it up. So I'm making that representation now.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
I mean, bearing in mind that we're looking at changes here. So we're not actually looking at the, you know, this doesn't reflect the balance in the overall document in any way. It's just, and it just happens that Historic England have made a number of submissions which have been represented in the plan. So, but we'll note your comment, Leslie.
Yes, I'd like to note it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Then just the rest of the table really relates, it's not relating to Norwich, so I don't know if you want to dwell on it too much, but there's a section on the main towns, some, you know, sites that have been added, some sites, site in Wyndham deleted from the contingency sites, key service areas, there's not very many changes there. Some, again, factual updates on the numbers. Village clusters, the plan for the village clusters is is proceeding, I understand. So that we haven't yet been consulted. We've been consulted on a scoping report, but so that policy just relates to the village clusters. I've referred in passing already to policy 7.5 about the small scale windfall housing development in small villages, that there's an alliance for more housing in villages. An extra 800 houses have been added into the plan. And new policy 7.6, important to note this, that a policy has been put into the plan which commits to 1 or 2 new settlements being brought forward through the next plan, not through this plan. So it's really flagging it up for the future. There's a bit of, I suppose there's a bit of a debate as to whether it should be a policy or not, but that's what's been agreed at the moment. But it's flagging up for the future, because the next time a plan is produced, the housing numbers will probably have increased significantly. So that's just to set us up to be able to respond effectively to that. So that's the end of the table. Has anybody got any comments on the last sort of few policies I've just mentioned? I mean, if not, I think I've already mentioned
I think I saw Adam. I think.
Oh,
Adam,
sorry,
did you have
Adam.
your hand up?
Thanks. With regards to the Thorpe Road site, is there a concrete time frame for Royal Mail vacating that now?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, sorry. We have to liaise with them as part of our 5-year supply work, and trying to work out what's happening on allocated sites and whether they're likely to come forward. They certainly want to. I don't think anything's been announced at all. I think, but they want to keep open the potential for redeveloping that site. I think it's one that's likely to come forward later in the plan period rather than early in the plan period. But they've provided evidence that they would like to do that. So it was allocated in our site allocations plan, for quite a few years now. Nothing has actually happened on it, but they seem to be developing plans to progress that.
Thanks. And my bigger question is with regards to whether there's a time frame and what the time frame is for producing the South Norfolk village clusters site allocations policies. Obviously, I'm conscious that's been delayed for quite some time now, and it's difficult for us to assess whether it's suitable before John Fuller gets his act together and actually produces this.
Well, I think the work has already started on the plan. Actually, we have been consulted on an early. It wasn't a public consultation on this SA scoping report. But so I think that I'm not sure. Graham may know more about the timescale, but I think it's meant to be running alongside the timescale as far as possible for this local plan. But I imagine it probably will be a bit. Given that we've now speeded up this plan, that's probably not going to be achievable. Graham, do you have any?
Judith, I did have the chance to look at South Norfolk's website the other day just to check out that issue, and their current timetable is they expect to publish their Regulation 18 consultation on their proposed sites in February. So it's effectively running in parallel but one stage behind. So if all this goes through and the Greater Norwich local plan gets published, they expect to they're effectively, if we publish the submission draft version of this plan in February as our timetable is, then they are one stage behind at that process, which does mean that by the time we get through to examination, they should have submitted those sites. So it should be emerging, but it's unlikely to catch up.
Thanks. If I may just come back on that, given South Norfolk are one step behind the 2 other districts, or with regards to village clusters, one step behind Broadland, how can we sufficiently assess whether the infrastructure requirements of those allocations are being met when we don't know where they're going to be?
I think that the issue of the South Norfolk village clusters and the fact that those allocations are not within the same plan is clearly a deficiency and something that creates a risk to the soundness of the Greater Norwich local plan. It frankly is not an optimum solution, that this plan is not comprehensive and doesn't address everything in the one document. There's no way of getting away from that. What I would point out, that as an overall quantum of the development, with looking about making provision for sites for up to about 50,000 homes, it is a relatively insignificant proportion of that overall development level that we are talking about here, and it is over quite a wide and dispersed rural area that growth will need to be assimilated and accommodated. So I think at the end of the day, I guess those issues will be the subject of closer scrutiny through the examination process of the South Norfolk Village Clusters Plan, and my hope and expectation is that when the Greater Norwich local plan is examined, there is a somewhat pragmatic approach from the inspector, who recognises that this comparatively minor element of the overall growth will be dealt with by a different process.
Thanks, Graham. Are there any other comments or questions on the table? Denise.
Yeah, I don't know if we're on general points. Probably we've reached the point where we are. Just
we will go on to them, but I'm asking in a minute. But I'm just asking, are there any final comments on the table we've just been through? I can't see anybody. And in terms of how we manage what's in front of us, obviously we've looked at the changes. So we've looked at what's changed compared to what we've seen previously. Obviously we haven't had time to read the revised document in any great detail, so we can take some general comments, but I would also say, if over the next few days you manage to read this in more detail and you want to email any comments in via Judith, then please do, because she will produce a briefing based on comments from this meeting for myself and Kevin and Alan. And I'm also conscious of the time, it's 10:20 now. We can take some general comments, but I think then we need to move on to the next item or we'll be here all morning. So Denise.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I think I'm speaking. Yes, thank you very much, Judith, for going through that table, which was very helpful. But my general comment is that I feel that the plan still isn't in compliance with the duty to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. And indeed, yesterday, the Prime Minister talked about actually tightening up the target by 2030, looking at maybe 69%. And so that's going to have an impact on what we do. And I just feel that the plan overall, the promotion of road building, the dispersal of housing in villages, extra housing in villages, the idea of a new settlement, the emphasis on growth overall, we're just not going to meet the climate change target. And so, I mean, Client Earth has made this point in a very articulate way, and the inspector and the plan is going to have to address this overall. I think it should be addressed now. And I'd like Mike and Kevin to make this point strongly on Monday, please. Thank you.
No one's rushing to respond to that. I mean, it's a political point, really. I mean, clearly we have pushed very hard to ensure that the environment and environmental matters are as prominent as they can be within the plan, and that's something that we, as I say, as a city council have pushed for, and not always has that been well received, but nonetheless that's what we do. And we think we would always argue that we need to put environmental needs at the heart of everything we do, and I think we tried to do that. That is something that we try to do within the plan. Having said that, we are working in partnership, and so we have to accept that we need the consent of the other partners if we're to get agreement. So there's always that constraint, Denise. And the other thing, of course, is that unlike you, I don't think that growth per se is a bad thing. There's good growth and there's bad growth, but growth there certainly is and will be, and we need to plan for that. Population growth, for example, jobs for people, for example, and we need to do it in the most sustainable way that we can. But I don't take the view, as I know you do, that growth should cease. There shouldn't be any. Clearly, in my opinion, there does need to be, and we need to manage that in the most sustainable way that we can. So I hear what you say, I understand exactly what you say, and we do need to make sure that we do meet those targets, but we have to negotiate with our partners in terms of what goes in the plan. And you know, it is done by consent, and so therefore it does have to be negotiated and agreed. So as I say, we've got a lot of sympathy with what you're saying, but yeah, there's also the real politics of it. But Kevin, you were trying to get in.
Yeah, just to, I mean, absolutely what you've said is true, and just to add it, the record is there in the way those comments have evolved, and if you've absolutely nothing better to do in your life, Denise, if you watch the public meeting, and go back on the old public meetings, you'll see that Mike and I and Alan have argued quite vociferously on environmental issues.
And as I say, Denise, it's not always been welcomed. Not always. Sometimes it has been, but you know, not always been welcomed. And I think more than any of the other authorities, we pushed environmental issues. But I absolutely take on board what you're saying, and understand exactly the point you're making, and we will continue to push those environmental concerns. Are there any other general comments? Because I think actually at this stage it's quite difficult. I think it might be far better to take them via email, particularly if you've got another meaty item, and we do have to wrap up by about 5 or 10 to 11. So Graham, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to make the link between the points that you were just debating there and the next item that you are going to come on to, because certainly when you are dealing with the impact of growth on climate change, it isn't just a question of what the total quantum of the growth is, or indeed what its distribution. It's as much about how you drive forward sustainable transport to get, you know, journeys that may currently be made by unsustainable modes onto sustainable modes, which is the subject and which Ben's going to talk about much further in relation to our proposed response to the local transport plan, which was the next item you're going to come on to. Absolutely. So I think it's possibly timely to move on to that.
Especially, I mean, we've got quite a radical plan that hopefully will inspire people. So I think if we could say, or Judith just wants to come in. Judith? Yeah,
I just wanted to say that we maybe just need to think about there's another DP meeting on the 16th of December looking at the sites. Did we want to just decide about how members input into that? We were talking about that the other day, whether email would be acceptable or...
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an issue, particularly people are very, very busy at the moment, and the meetings are coming in thick and fast. We could try and get a meeting in to consider the site allocations or we could try and have a discussion via email. What do members think? Well, I'll put it this way. Who wants a meeting? Who's happy with email? Hands going up, people nodding. It's email then, Judith.
Thank you.
Good. That was nice and simple. So if people could also, in terms of the plan, if you could send any further comments to Judith, and feel free to copy all the other members of the panel in so that we can have a discussion if we need to, or make comments. But then what Judith will do with all of that is to then produce a briefing note for me and Alan and Kevin to take forward before Monday afternoon's meeting.
Yeah, it would be great if I could have those by very first thing on Monday, please, because I'm only going to have an hour or two to get them, pull them together.
Sure.
If that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Judith and Graham. But thank you, Judith, for taking us through that and explaining it so well. So we now move on to the next item and the final item, which is the local transport plan and our response to that. So Ben is going to take us through that. We've got about 25 minutes before we have to wrap up. So where's Ben? Oh, you've moved, Ben. There you are. Hello, Ben. You were bottom left-hand side of my screen, and suddenly you've moved to the top right-hand side, and I don't know why, but anyway. So over to you, Ben.
So I have a simple presentation, which I think Leonie is going to put on the screen. So this is that our response to the local transport plan is something that is on the agenda for Cabinet on the 16th of December. So this meeting will help to inform that. And so, Leonie, if you could move on a slide. Very sluggish slide transition. There we are. So the local transport plan, we're on to the 4th version of that. It's a document produced by the County Council, covers the whole of Norfolk and includes policies for transport that apply to the whole county. It's intended to last until 2036, and they plan to adopt this new version of the document in April next year. It doesn't include an implementation plan. They say that will follow, including schemes and more detail of projects that would be undertaken. So we've been invited, along with many other people, to comment on the draft. Excuse me. I think it's really important to note that we lost the agency agreement at the end of March, and so our role in relation to transport has changed quite dramatically, and almost everybody who undertook transport duties no longer works for the City Council. I am our transport lead now, and which is why I'm preparing this response. And so our role is about influencing more than anything, and trying to exercise that influence intelligently through advocacy and good ideas and persuasion. So having said that, we all agree, I'm sure, that transport is fundamentally important to the health, well-being and prosperity of our citizens, and that's something which is embodied very clearly in the city vision. So we need to be involved in these debates and to do as much as we can to influence the County Council in terms of what they do. So let's move to the next slide. Actually, probably of greater relevance to shaping transport in the city is the Transport for Norwich strategy. Now, we currently have NATS, the Norwich Area Transport Strategy, that's very out of date. And so a new document, the TFN strategy, is going to be produced. And really, this response to the local transport plan is as much about saying what the sort of things we would like to see included in the Transport for Norwich strategy as it is about critiquing the local transport plan. But in terms of the local transport plan, I think the overall view that we're sort of forming is that it fails to present the ambitious policies that we would want to see for sustainable transport. It's notable that where there's clarity in the document, that seems to relate more to road building and long distance connectivity, and that the document doesn't really meet the specific needs of the city. And so therefore either the local transport plan needs to be dramatically improved, or potentially accept the Transport for Norwich strategy is the place where you know, we need the city and its hinterlands transport policies and projects to be presented. Let's move to the next slide. So what we're proposing to do in this response is identify a series of policy principles that we think ought to be at the heart of the local transport plan, and identify where some of them are to an extent featured in the local transport plan, but many of them are not. And then state a number of interventions that we think naturally flow from those policy principles that we'd like to be seriously considered and analysed through the production of the Transport for Norwich strategy. I hear a slightly strange noise on the line. I assure you it's not me. So the policy principles that we're intending to advocate are, some of them are listed here and on the next slide. So I think there is a tendency to just predict and provide things. No, Leonie, sorry, can you go back to the previous one? Thank you. So in transport planning, there's often a tendency to sort of say, this is the amount of traffic that we're expecting to see grow in an area based on previous trends. And based upon, you know, the number of additional homes and places of employment that you might expect to see in an area. And the local transport plan, I think, is to an extent guilty of this, in that it states a prediction for the amount of traffic that's going to growth that's going to occur. Well, I don't think that's the right approach. You know, we shouldn't be predicting and providing. We should be planning what we want, and undertaking the measures that are needed to achieve that future that we want, and then provide those things. Respecting climate limits is really quite fundamental to that. You know, the idea of setting a budget for the amount of greenhouse gas emissions derived from transport in the county or in the Greater Norwich area, and then understanding how what we are going to do either adheres to that or doesn't. Health, well-being and fairness need to be at the centre of transport policy. There will be a lot of detail around this, I assure you, so forgive me if this presentation sounds a little glib, but I'm aware we haven't got long. And so obviously, enabling people to walk and cycle around the city is a fundamental way of improving people's health, not exposing them to pollutants, and providing the ability to move around in a way that can be afforded financially, which is an element of the next principle as well, that you shouldn't need to own and run a car in order to be able to get to all the places that you want to in the city. We think that there should be a clear hierarchy of modes of transport that's reflected in the degree of investment that's put into them, and that prioritization should be based on the amount of energy and the amount of space the different modes of transport take up. And so I'm proposing to include essentially a table which ranks different modes of transport based upon criteria around whether it's a shared mode of transport. So, you know, there are subtleties here around, you know, multiple occupancy vehicles, obviously public transport particularly being preferable to, you know, the very, very high levels of single occupancy car use that we see in the city at the moment, around the amount of energy that's used and where that is derived from. So, you know, a vehicle that's powered by electricity as opposed to powered by fossil fuels, that would advantage one over another, and that would translate through not just in terms of the facilities provided for those in movement, but also charging and parking. And then there has been a tendency in the county and more broadly nationally to just look at the movement function of streets. This is not best practice. And what we need to do, and what we've certainly advocated as a city for many years, is to look at a piece of highway and understand, well, what is its movement function, but what is its place function as well? So does it go, it may be an A road, but do people live along it? Is there a neighbourhood centre on that A road that people gravitate towards and need to be able to cross the road to get to that place? And what I find is quite common is, you know, you might start talking about a scheme and it's all about the movement function. It's not about recognizing that people need to, that there's a lot of community activity that takes place and needs to be facilitated rather than undermined by the kind of transport changes that are made. And at its extreme, you might find that a street is not referred to by name, but is referred to by number. And I just think that that can be symptomatic of the of a particular mentality. So it's the Newmarket Road rather than the A11 would be an example of that. We need to be mindful of the equality impact of what we're doing, and we can't do that unless we speak to the people who have a sort of lived experience of moving around the city, you know, without sight or in a wheelchair, and so that is something that needs to be brought out more strongly. Leonie, could you move to the next slide? We have there's an issue in terms of goods delivery around the last mile of deliveries, and so therefore looking at things like freight consolidation, not a new idea, but more recently, you know, a company like Zedify, who delivers by cargo bike in the city centre, they're demonstrating what can be done, and the fact that we you know, a couple of years ago made it possible for Zedify and cyclists more generally to access streets within the city centre meant that they had a competitive advantage over deliveries made by vehicles. So getting involved in that area of policy is quite important, and it's often kind of left to as a sort of poor relation in transport policy terms. The next thing is about counteracting this tendency to just look at hard, precise, grey infrastructure in terms of asphalt, and thinking that vegetation is something that should be placed in a different space, or dealing with drainage should be done through pipes rather than absorbent land. So the intelligent approach, which looks at you know, the skills that landscape architects, drainage experts, and engineers can bring to a problem, means that the highway space needs to accommodate these things intelligently rather than trying to separate them out. The next point is around not being a kind of blind to just embracing technology for its own sake, there is obviously a lot that we can do through the inclusion of sensing technologies on different items of street furniture that help us to understand how people are using the city. And we're gradually accumulating some very rich data about cycling, for instance. And in terms of electric vehicles, there is a lot that we need to do to improve the ability for people to charge their vehicles, but particularly given that it will be illegal to sell a exclusively fossil fueled vehicle from 2030. However, we need to be careful not to see electric vehicles as a sort of panacea. There are clearly still major problems with them, which are the same as with any car. You know, they do kill and injure people. They do take up a lot of road space. There is the question about how the electricity is generated. So we just have to be a bit careful in embracing the electric vehicles as preferable to fossil fuel, in guarding against thinking that somehow makes them the equivalent of cycling and walking and public transport as the primary ways that we should be encouraging people to move around the city. We have a problem in terms of essentially shaping transport, which is the whole fragmentation of governance administration is compounded by different assets in the street being owned by different organisations. Just as a simple illustration, a traffic signal is owned by the county council, a seat is owned by the city council, the surface is owned by the county council, what's underneath the surface is owned by a multiplicity of different companies. A street light is owned by the county council, but a PFI contract with a separate organisation, Amy, is how, you know, they actually achieve, and we actually achieve, changes to street lighting. This makes it phenomenally difficult to actually design changes in the street. So actually unifying that asset ownership into fewer organisations will enable us to achieve more of what we want to do. Traffic modelling underlies a lot of the decisions that are made currently, and they are deeply flawed. I'm a very sceptical voice when it comes to the use of traffic modelling. You know, for instance, we need to get away from planning for peak car use at certain times of the day. Just generally, we need to do that. We shouldn't be providing the amount of space that is only going to be used for a short period of the day. And furthermore, you know, whilst we have to be cautious, it seems likely that a long-term outcome of the current pandemic will be that more people work from home, and therefore the kind of peak time commuting that we see is likely to be smoothed out. Also, traffic modelling it can be quite crude and looks at traffic across a wide area, and rather than the sort of micro level of what happens at a particular junction. And it also assumes that if you displace vehicles from, say, one junction onto a different part of the highway network through an intervention, that there's no evaporation of vehicles, you know, through people making a decision to travel differently. And that's not true. You know, we have to work on the basis that logically, if we're going to make it easier for people to walk and cycle through an intervention, that means that some of the traffic that might go somewhere else will not go somewhere else, because people will be walking and cycling. And then we have two final policy principles. One is around, you know, let's acknowledge that maintenance is as important as improvement. You know, we find that parts of the cycle network, for instance, are very poorly maintained and don't get equivalent treatment to a road which is within the same level of the transport hierarchy in terms of its network status, and that needs to be recognised. And then in terms of investment, we have been very good locally at securing funding for things, but it's always what this country is bad at is central government announces a challenge fund and everybody competes in different areas with one another to secure this money. And it's not the right way to govern effectively. So therefore, in order to sort of counteract that tendency, we need to generate sources of money locally that we can then determine how we're going to spend them in a sort of hypothecated way in terms of taxation. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that we stop asking government for money that's available to invest in things like we did with the Transforming Cities Fund through the county or the Cycle Ambition money, but we need other sources of funding too. So if we move on to the sort of some of the interventions that flow from those policy principles that we would like the County Council to investigate through the production of the Transport for Norwich strategy. Leonie, could you move to the next slide, please? So this is clearly not an exhaustive list, and some of these things may not actually prove to be viable or a good idea, or maybe it may be that other interventions would achieve the objectives and fulfill the principles more effectively. But a workplace parking levy, which is something that Nottingham have done, in principle has a number of advantages with it. There's a lot of space that is essentially dedicated to surface parking associated with businesses, and so that is essentially free space currently and could be more intensively used. So one way of incentivizing businesses to think more creatively about what to do with the land that's dedicated to parking, and to enable and encourage their employees to travel in different ways, is by making the holding of parking land more expensive. And so a workplace parking levy is a way that can be achieved. It can generate income, of course, for investment in transport. And also it's vital to note, though, that it's not something that could or should be implemented over a small area, say the city centre or the city council's area. This is one of those things that would have to be undertaken collaboratively over a wider area, because we could not create a situation where businesses move to the edge of the city, because that would be entirely counterproductive. So parking tariffs are something that ought to be reviewed to see whether we can actually potentially raise some more income through looking at the cost of long-term parking, which by comparison with some car parks in the city centre is less expensive. We also need to try and incentivize the use of park and ride, because one of the decisions that people make around that is the relative cost of park and ride versus driving into the city centre to park. So that is an area which the City Council has much more direct control over, although of course we only control about a third of the parking space within the city centre. But nevertheless, some of our car parks are quite badly located, and mean that people do drive through some quite sensitive parts of the city centre to actually access those car parks, particularly some of the older surface car parks. And so gradually moving towards a situation where you have car parks that are well located in relation to the inner ring road, and which are offering a good service to people. That's where we need to get to. And the Barn Road car park that's just been completed using the air rights for student accommodation above it would be a model of that approach. Then thinking about technological future around autonomous vehicles, this is something that will probably come through fairly swiftly. And it could be a dystopian future, or it could be it could offer some tremendous advantages. One way that it could offer advantages is if we if it frees our streets of parked vehicles so that we can use them for walking, we can use them for planting trees, we can use them to create a much more attractive residential environment. And so if you think about it, potentially in a few years' time, it will be technically feasible to simply summon a vehicle. It may be a vehicle you own, or it may be a vehicle that's shared by various owners from a remote location in the city to come and pick you up and take you to where you want to go. Now, that vehicle or those vehicles do not need to be parked outside your home. They could be parked in a remote location. So that is something we need to be beginning to plan for and think about. So park and ride sites, for instance, potentially their use could be diversified for things like that, for things like parcel collections, rather than vans having to deliver to everybody's door. You know, if you're using a park and ride site, can you actually gain more services from those locations? Reallocating road space is something that is tremendously important, and so therefore shrinking the amount of land that's devoted to driving particularly single occupancy vehicles through our city streets, but instead using the land that frees up to provide space for protected cycle lanes, for bus lanes, for widened footways. This is something that we are constantly looking for opportunities to do, and need to be more radical in taking that approach. And actually the gear change document published by government in the summer is really surprisingly ambitious, and we need to be applying that rigorously locally to decisions around the use of road space, because it envisages very rapidly a situation where 50% of journeys within an urban area are made by cycling and walking, and that can only be done if you have safe and generous amounts of space for people to walk and cycle. Otherwise, just people will not do it. This next point is around thinking about, it flows from the last point really. If we have ultimately 3 orbital roads encircling the city, then rather than just producing more traffic capacity, we need to use the opportunity to repurpose some of the existing highway space that exists. And so a proposition that we would like to explore is whether the way that the inner ring road currently works is something that should continue, or whether there are opportunities, at least for parts of it, to be changed so that it's much easier for people to move across the inner ring road to get to and from the city centre, and make the environment around it more pleasant for people who maybe are living and working in the vicinity of that road. Next one, Leonie, please.
So, Ben, we've literally got 5 minutes before the meeting has to end.
Oh, so I think I will stop talking. You've got those final bullet points on the screen there, and I'm happy to take any questions now, or if anyone wants to email me afterwards, then that's fine. And of course, there will be the actual text of a response to the local transport plan embodying these things, published with the cabinet papers next week.
So yeah, thanks very much, Ben. Yeah, it's tough to go through something so detailed in towards the end of the meeting. I did see that Judith wanted to speak. If I could, and Denise, so I could just ask people to try and be as brief in the points they make as they can, but also do remember that when the cabinet papers come out, you'll see the detailed proposed response, and of course you'll have an opportunity at cabinet, the group leaders, to make comment and seek to achieve change. So I'll start with Judith, please.
Can't hear you, Judith.
Right. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Judith, we couldn't hear you. There's very strange noise coming at your end. I don't know what it is. No. Do you want to write your question in the chat box, Judith? Denise, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, very frustrating for Judith.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Ben. Really pleased to hear all that you say, and say if only the City Council was the Transport Authority for Norwich, but also the Transport Authority for Greater Norwich, because whilst we've seen traffic fall in the city centre, we've been seeing traffic grow around the periphery of Norwich. We've seen more road building around the periphery. We've seen car parking, and it's really escalating the traffic growth. And so I would like to see, as well as the parking levy tariffs, is very rigorous parking standards applied right across Norwich, including the edge of Norwich, to have a consistent parking standard so that developers aren't tempted to go to the edge of the city. And also just to say that I don't know if it's possible to add in, but for the county of the city also to lobby for national road user charging by distance, and some sort of pricing system is going to have to come in when the country moves to electric vehicles, and that would perform a great service in encouraging modal shift. And it would also be equitable because people who drive a short only occasionally would benefit. I've just got a question in that I did, for the Greens, fill in very briefly the county questionnaire by the deadline, and that was because my understanding is that the LTP is a statutory document, and so therefore I felt I had to respond by the deadline. But I'm interested to see that the City Council is going to be responding obviously at a later date, and so obviously if people are still able to submit comments, we'll certainly do that. And to just to add finally, yes, thank you for putting in the 20 mile per hour default across Norwich, and I'd be interested in hearing, interested in talking to Mike about your definition of the default across Norwich, Mike. The Greens have put in 20 miles per hour default across within the outer ring road to encompass all the A and B roads. But across Norwich, that's interesting. Does it include, for example, the inner and outer ring roads?
Denise, obviously we're really short of time.
Yeah, sure.
So the first thing, I think the issue about responding to the consultation, could you take it offline with Ben? That would be helpful if you could do that. In terms of the Labour Group's more ambitious plan for 20 mile an hour limits across the City Council, the whole City Council area, and the purpose of that is not to exclude places outside the outer ring road, which equally would benefit. It's not just NR2 that needs to benefit. It's other places like NR5 that need to benefit, and NR3. So we're thinking about the whole city. I mean, clearly, we're not looking to make the main arterial routes 20 miles an hour. We're actually primarily thinking either of residential areas or areas where there's housing close to the street, but where you've got places like Dereham Road, where you've got houses built back from the road and it's a main route into the city, that we wouldn't be looking at introducing 20 miles an hour there. But that's something which I know from comments that were made by Ben Price, which I read in the press and I presume were correctly reported, the Green, he shares that view. But anyway, that's where we are at. We want to see the benefits extended to the whole of the city. So I hope that answers your question.
Really, no, it doesn't. Because we already have 20 miles per hour in all residential roads in the corporate plan. So we were wanting to go further, and our starting point was moving to the outer ring road and then to extend further. But I mean, we've already got 20 miles per hour on all residential roads across Norwich. So we were wanting to go further. It sounds as if you're just wanting to stick to 20 miles per hour in residential roads.
They come back to me. So we don't have 20 miles per hour on the Pilling Park estate in my ward.
No, but the point is that it's there in the corporate plan as a measure. Obviously, we want the implementation to be speeded up, but it is there as a priority in the corporate plan. So the starting point is 20 miles.
We're not looking at a blanket 20 mile an hour. We're saying that most roads should be 20 mile an hour, but there will be exceptions. And we'll look at that on the basis of the use of that route and also safety issues. And that's where we were coming from.
That's a disappointment.
We've really got to wrap up the meeting actually, because we're now into injury time. We've gone over. Can I suggest that further comments to Ben, but also, as I say, when you see the more detailed response, which will come out with the cabinet papers, feel free to send an email to Ben, copy it into everybody else. And also, don't forget your group leaders will have the opportunity to comment and influence cabinet at the cabinet meeting. Okay, right. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the officers for the fantastic presentations they've given. It's been really helpful. See you all soon.